Hey everybody, I'm Brian. Let's go do some woodworking. In this episode, we're going to build a hand plane, and you want to make sure that all your tools are set up nice and square, that your material is flat and square, your edges are all good, and everything fits nice. And once you've done that, then we'll start with the layout. Okay, so here we have everything we need to lay things out. Here's the old hand plane, and I want to talk about the moving parts of that real quick. So let's take it apart. I have a hammer here. That's how you use a wooden hand plane. Tap it on the back, and I'm sort of pulling up on the wedge. Take the wedge out. There's the blade and chip breaker. This is from Hawk Tools, and I have another one that I'm going to use for this new plane. And this is the body of the plane. It only has one moving part, and that's the cross pin. The cross pin sits in a 5/16 inch hole, and it's about 1/2 inch thick. It's rounded across its top and flat on the bottom. This one's sort of triangular in section actually, but it's 1/2 inch tall. That's the important part to remember. The wedge has an 8 to 10 degree angle on it to keep everything nice and tight. And I'm going to lay it out on here and show you the angles as I do it. So the sides are going to remain as full pieces, obviously. So I've marked their orientation on the bottom, how I want them to look on the finished plane. I think that'll look nice. I like the grain. So I'm going to take my two side pieces and put them aside for the time being and do my marking on this middle piece. I've cut this to 2 3/4 inches high, and I'm going to sit my plane on here, and I'm going to mark where the mouth of the plane exits. That's right there. Alright, so I've laid everything out now on my block, and I wanted to hold the ruler up to give you a sense of how big it is and where to lay things out. So the overall length of my plane is 9 3/8 of an inch. The frog, or the ramp that the blade sits on, looks like it begins at about 3 15/16 from the front. That's where the angle goes up. You can see that I've drawn the blade and chip breaker on there. The blade's 3/16 of an inch thick, the one that I have, and the chip breaker's 1/8 of an inch thick. So a total of 5/16 of an inch. So we have 45 degrees on the frog going backward, and on this front area here, that's 33 degrees going up, forward. And I've traced a little bit of an arch on there. At this point, I want these pieces to be too tight for the blade to exit the bottom, because we want to tune that up afterwards, after we've made the plane. So what I want to be able to do after we've built the plane is be able to put the blade in and begin sliding it down the frog and have it hit the wood and not be able to exit the front of the plane. And we do that because we can then take a file or a sanding stick or a chisel and carefully pare away the wood until we leave a very tight gap, a tight opening for the blade to exit the bottom. The other thing to mention is that the center point of the cross pin is important here. So where the 45 degree angle comes down from the frog, I've drawn a 90 degree angle up from that point. I can take my ruler and put it on there, and I'm at 1 1/4 inches above the base of my plane on that perpendicular line there. That's where our 5/16 hole is going to go to get the cross pin into the plane. So I'm going to cut out these parts and we'll start again. I've gone to my bandsaw and I've cut the pieces up, and here I have the back piece. Now you could do this also on a chop saw. It doesn't have to be a bandsaw. But you do have to be really flat and really square. So I set my bandsaw up, so I'm really happy with the squareness because it's a bandsaw cut. It's not flat. So I want to use my block plane and get that really, really flat. And if anything, I actually want it just a little dished in the middle so that I know I have nice tight pressure right down here. That way we don't get any chatter in the finished plane. So I'm going to hand plane this flat. I don't want to break out any grain on the bottom here. So first, I'm just going to shave a little bit of wood off of the end that doesn't have to be sharp down there. So I'll get rid of a little bit of that one. And I want to plane across evenly so that I maintain the squareness. After everything's nice and flat, you need to route a slot for the cap screw. The slot should be slightly wider than the cap screw itself and stop before the bottom of the plane. When you're setting up your router, you need to set it up so that the bit cuts slightly deeper than the thickness of the cap screw. That way, it won't bottom out in the slot and affect the performance of the plane. Alright, so I've cleaned out the slot for the screw on my blade. Everything's nice and flat. It's a stopped groove that ends before it gets to the bottom of the plane. The screw can sit inside of there. The blade sits nice and flat, and there's enough room in there for the blade to be adjusted with the hammer after we're done. So now we're ready to go over and start looking at assembling. At this point, you need to transfer the layout marks and the location for the cross pin to the sides. I take both my side pieces and glue them together with a few drops of CA glue. Then I cross drill them and they're ready to install on the plane. Alright, so I'm going to cut the other parts that I need, which is the wedge. And I've taken my center piece that's left over, came out from my cutout in the middle, and I'm going to make my wedge out of that. So, as I said before, it's maybe like between a 6 to 10 degree angle. It's sort of like, you can see it. You want a very shallow taper. You don't want a sharp taper, because if it's too steep a taper, it's just going to kick out all the time and not stay in. So you want it kind of flattish. Luckily I have one here that I can just trace. But you can see that shape and you can experiment and get something that fits right. But I'm going to trace this one out on here and cut it. And the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make my cross pin out of this little piece of hardwood that I have. I'm going to cut it so that the full length of the piece is the same as the width of my plane. So I'm going to cut a chunk that's the full width, and then I'm going to cut this down to 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch, which is the size that I need. And then I'm going to make myself a couple of little 5/16 tenons on the end and carve them round and make them fit into these holes. And I'll get that all cut here in a second. When you're cutting out the wedge on the bandsaw, be careful not to get your hands too close to the blade. When you're making the cross pin, I use a crosscut slit on my table saw and a positive stop to make both tenons the same length. I make the tenons square and then pare them round with a chisel and a sanding stick later on to make them fit snugly in the hole. The cross pin needs to be pretty tight. It should be a firm fit. It shouldn't rattle around. So when you're making the little pins on the end of your cross pin, start fitting them and pressing them into the hole that you drilled. And it'll burnish the surface. And then just start getting rid of that burnished surface. I have a sanding stick here, and I make these with adhesive-backed sandpaper. And you can see where the little burnished marks are. Get rid of those. Try again. And it'll start going in more and more. So I've taken my pieces, I've clamped them together, I have my cross pin in the middle, and I can turn it. It's stiff, but I can turn it, which is what I want. I can take my blade and put it in, and it strikes the front piece. And everything down here flush, and the blade won't come out. It's hitting that front piece of wood, which is what we want, because we want to file that mouth later on. So that's good. I can check my wedge. This will need to be tuned up, but it'll work. So that's good. It needs to be narrowed because it's the same width as this stuff right now. So I have to narrow that down a bit more. So at this point, I'm pretty much ready to glue up. So to glue this up, what I'm going to do is mark the inside with a pencil. And this is a real important part. You've got to mark it. Do the same over here. And the same on that one. And I'm going to put some wax on the inside faces of this so that glue, if it squeezes out along here, doesn't stick to this wood and can be chipped out very easily. And to glue it up, all I'm going to do, I've made this too long by a bit so that I can use dowels as locators, and I'm going to go ahead and drill those holes as well. So I'm going to drill little holes, dowel hole, dowel hole, dowel hole, dowel hole. Same thing on the other side. And those dowel pins will keep everything located properly, and they'll get sawn off afterwards. They're not going to be part of the plane, which is why we've made it a little too long. So everything's lined up, everything's looking good and ready for glue, so I'm going to drill those holes and do a glue up. I drill 1/4-inch holes and make small 1/4-inch dowels to locate the parts of the plane. The wax I use is called a waxolite, and it's a glue release wax. The glue is aliphatic resin, Tight Bond Original. Right, so we've unclamped our blank. Everything's glued up nice. You can see all that wax on the inside of there. And now's when that's going to come in handy, because we're going to go in with a chisel and we're going to carefully get rid of that glue that's come through there. We don't want to remove any wood. We just want to get rid of the glue. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to clean up all the glue out of there. And after I've done that, I can do some other stuff. I'll do that in a minute. So I'm going to take my plane now and I'm going to sit it on here, and I want to have my ruler handy so that you can see the dimensions of everything. And you can see how I'm doing it. You can see the sizes roughly. And these hand planes are designed around your hand. So it's really important that when you're making one, you make it to your own liking. You know, there's no template for this. This is my jointing plane that I made. I have pretty big hands, so I made a big heel on this because I found that the straight ones, some of them are straight with no back, I found that I didn't find those comfortable in my hand. So I made one that was more comfortable in my hand, I did it for my thumb. You know, these are very individual. You can customize them as much as you want. This plane here, I didn't even bother. It just has a bandsawn surface on the front there because it makes it a little more grippy. And this has been a very hard-working tool for a very long time, and it's lasted a long time. I've never wanted to change it in any way. So I like the shape of this. You can customize that shape in any way. But what I will do is I'll take my ruler and I'll sit it right on here so that you can see roughly the dimensions. So from where the blade opening is back, it's roughly 5 1/4 inches, you know, something like that. The front of the plane, from where the blade pokes through forward, it's 3 1/2-ish, 3 9/16, 5/8, something like that. The area at the back here, up behind the blade, you can see how the blade comes clear, and there's maybe a 1/2 inch clearance down to that. That's pretty clear there. That's about 2 3/4 high at the back there, which is how high I've made my blank, 2 3/4. At the front here, it's about 2 1/2, 2 9/16, so a little bit lower. And it's sort of just a long swoop with a little bit of a sharper swoop at the back. And then the shape of the backers really just depends on what feels good in your hand. And you know, some people completely radius these and really sculpt them and make divots. And I've carved with a gouge the inside of that one just for fun. So you can do all that stuff. You know, you just you personalize it and make it your own, and have fun with it. So I'm going to lay it out how I like it, saw it out, and then we'll start recording again. So I've cleaned it up, I've bandsawed it out, I've got the rough shape, and now the next step is to get the bottom nice and flat. And I'm going to do that with one sheet of sandpaper on the jointer, just by stroking it like a hand plane on the surface of the jointer and flattening the bottom of the plane until I'm happy with the whole surface. And to make sure that I'm doing it properly, I'm going to make sure I've got pencil lines everywhere. And that way, when those pencil lines are all gone, I know I've touched the entire bottom of the hand plane with the sandpaper and I'm flat. So I'm going to go over to the jointer, I'm going to do that, and then once we've done that, we'll tune up the mouth and we'll make some shavings. Okay, so I've gone over and I've flattened the bottom. And get rid of this one. Flattened the bottom, happy with that. So now we want to tune the mouth. So we get the blade in there, and you can see it obviously doesn't come out the bottom because it's running into the front. And so I'm going to use a sanding stick. I make these all the time with scrap wood and adhesive back sandpaper. And I'm going to go through here, but I'm not going to go through here at 90. I'm going to tilt back just a little bit. I don't know, 5-10 degrees, something like that. Just eyeball it. And I'm going to start sanding that little sharp corner there. Go back and forth a few times, and then I'll try my blade again. Oh, see? Perfect. Now it's coming through on one end, and on the other, over here, it needs just a touch more. You don't want it so tight that the wood shavings won't go through. So I'll do that just a little bit more up here. And then I'll try it again. I'll look at my clearance. It's getting there. It's a little tight still. You don't want it so tight that the wood shavings can't go through it. I'm going to take a little bit more off the top. Right about there. And I think I'm happy with that. So now I know my iron is going to go in with my chip breaker. Everything's functioning nicely there. Now the only thing left to do is to get the wedge in and to carve the wedge. So let me show you the wedge in my old hand plane. You can see that I've used a gouge and I've carved a little divot into that side of there, and that's so that you can sort of grasp it and pull it out of the plane. So I need to do the same thing on this one. I need to carve it. What we want to make sure of is that when this wedge is in, it's not having pressure on one side and not on the other. So it's very just roughly bandsawed out. There's not much to it. So I want to, first of all, this is too thick. So I need to narrow it a little bit. So I'll do that. And then I want to test it for fit. Okay, so you can see that's going in pretty well. But you can also see that it's too long. I don't want it to be that long because it's going to catch shavings down there and it's going to get in the way. It's going to cause it to clog. So I want to be able to look in there. Let me set up my other hand plane so that you can see how that looks. Might as well just do it with this blade. Set that in there. You can see that this is narrowed right down to a nice little point, and that's in there. And I can see the entire bevel of the blade of the chip breaker. So I can see this entire surface here. So I want the end of this guy up on top of here. So let's put this in here again. Make sure how we're sitting in there is all right. It looks like there's fairly even pressure across it. And now when I look inside of there, I can't see the end of that at all. So I want to take off about that much and then sand a little round onto it and then see what we're doing. So I'll have a look at that. Alright, so that'll go in there with a fair amount of pressure now, and I think it'll hold pretty good. I would like to know what the pressure is doing inside of there, so I want to knock it back out again. And I'm going to go like this. I'm going to take this and flip it over so I can see it. And then I'm going to take a soft pencil, so this is an HB, and I want to put some pencil marks on the underside of it. Just gently, not a lot. And I want to see if those rub off at all and where on my wedge, because it's really important that it has even pressure so that it stays in adjustment. So flip that back around, put my blade in, and we'll set that wedge just like we would if we were using the hand plane. Okay, so I've set the wedge in, now I'm going to pull it back up. And what did it do? I can see an even mark edge to edge on both surfaces. So I'm happy with that. That's what we want. We want pressure from edge to edge, and it looks like it's doing what it's supposed to. So this needs a little bit of carving on the corners, make it look nice. Use the gouge. But this plane is effectively ready to use as a tool. So I can set the wedge in. Let me just make sure this was sort of sitting to one side. I want to kind of sight the blade into the center of the plane. Sit the wedge in, and then set the wedge. Oopsies. Set the wedge. And then let's get a board and see what it does. Let's use this one. There's a nice hard piece of arbutus. So we'll use an arbutus hand plane to plane a piece of arbutus. And we'll see what happens. Let's get that blade. I can feel it there a little bit. Feel it across it. Feels like it's a little bit too much actually. So to back the blade out, I tap it here and then reset the wedge. To make the blade go in, tap it on the back. And then to change the angle, of course, I hit it on the edges. So let's see if that makes a shaving. Nope. A little bit more. There we go, starting to make a shaving. It's a little on the one side, so tap it over. Still a little bit on the one side. And there we go. That's a functional hand plane. And that's some very hard wood, and it just took a real nice shaving out of that. So that's how you make a hand plane. And I hope you enjoyed it.